Hey everyone, Phreak here, and patch 10.15 is here, so let's talk about this one. Pretty decent patch. Definitely some buffs I didn't think needed to exist. A couple of changes that are going to be interesting to dive into. So overall, I'm glad this patch exists. I think it really could be better, but that's okay. Improvement is improvement, and that's usually good enough for me. So yeah, let's talk about the fact that 10.15 has 8 buffs and a lot of nerfs. You notice that almost all of these nerfs are aimed at pro play. They are top tier pro play picks overall. Yep, Aphelios, Thresh, TF, Lee Sin, Ornn. Those were all really top flight. I mentioned those before. Mentioned them in Phreak Show. They're among the very top champions in pro play. I will say Fiddlesticks is more annoying than purely OP. Does have pretty solid win rate overall. Is definitely fairly annoying. Mostly annoying as tank Fiddlesticks in lane. I totally understand and accept Riot nerfing this. Totally reasonable to do. I think that's fine, even if it isn't like automatically flagging the like win rate thing. I think it is good for designers to spend time to say, hey, this is frustrating players, we should nerf it. So I'm a fan of that. Otherwise, buffs to Caitlyn, Gragas, Aurelia, Rakan, Shen, Skarner, Swain, and Yuumi. Yuumi needs it. Swain's a cool retouch. Skarner's a cool retouch. Shen doesn't seem to need it, but they're doing it anyway. Rakan, I don't think needs it. They're doing it anyway. Aurelia, I didn't actually double check. Gragas is fine to buff. Caitlyn is already pretty strong. So, like I said, I'm not a fan of every single buff they did, but that's okay. Again, I think the patch is overall a positive. And then buffs to the Spellthief's line and a nerf to Spellbook, because that was definitely taking over top tier play as well. I like the way they sort of orchestrated all those skins. This is cool stuff. I'm a big fan of this graphic. Cool stuff. Cool beans. Shout out / kudos to whoever kind of had this idea and executed it. This is never usually just like one person doing like all the work, but hey, good job whoever did this. I'm a really big fan of your work. All right, so also a really good thing in this patch is Flex Q is finally opened up. Now, I remember asking about this in how long ago? Like May of last year, I think. And they're like, yeah, we think it would be really interesting to like open this up now that Clash is coming out. And yeah, it'd be a good idea. And if my memory serves, they wanted to save it until the 2020 season, which I totally understood and made sense. And then it didn't happen until July of the 2020 season, and I'm sure there was a reason why. It just I really wanted this earlier, but we have it, and that's the part that really matters. So I can't really complain. But this has been planned for a while, at least from my experience, or at least someone had the idea to do it for a while from my experience, and they finally got it through, which is great. There's going to be some wonky games where it's 4 Master Tier players and a diamond against 1 diamond and 4 silvers, and that's going to be the thing, Like, yep, that's what's going to happen. Sorry. Okay, so Lilia exists, which is cool. Great. And we have our, 8th patch in a row of direct Aphelios nerfs. This champion is definitely very good. He has seemingly a very long sort of skill mastery curve because it keeps getting nerfed and he keeps still being super good in pro play and, viable in solo queue. So as people put the games in, it gets better and better. I will also say the nerfs are almost always smaller than they look on paper, only because you only use any one given gun between 20 and 40% of the time. Like, it's not even available. It's not like you're nerfing, Udyr's Tiger Stance or Turtle Stance where, well, it's one of his 3 abilities, so it's only up. It's like, no. He can at all points use Turtle Stance. Aphelios at not all points can use Chakrams. Like if you nerf it, just most of the game he's just not even using it anyway, right? It's 1/5 of his auto attacks, 1/5 of his spell presses. So by default, like it's, any given Aphelios nerf is smaller than it is in other champions. That's just like a fact. Regardless, more Aphelios nerfs, good thing to do here. So the turret, I want to point out, by the way, the turret is untargetable until it activates. So it's not like against Heimerdinger where you just play Caitlyn and kill this thing out of range. That's not possible. So a minion has to walk up or a tank has to walk up to wake up the Crescendum turret. But regardless, it has 75 less range, which is very meaningful. The activation time, it takes longer to start the very first auto attack, so I believe that allows you to dance in then hop out. I think I could be wrong about that. At the very least, it means that when he's using it for a teamfight DPS tool, you are taking damage 10 like a tenth of a second later, which is relevant, not massive. The fact that this will fail to hit target sometimes, though, is a big deal, right? This is the kind of thing where sometimes you just won't be in range of it, and so it won't attack you, and that's really, really meaningful. Now, notice, to be fair, this is activation radius, probably not auto-attack radius. I will assume these are different things until corrected otherwise. I've been wrong about this before, because sometimes the wording is not optimal in the patch notes. But end of the day, this will wave clear less well. It will hit enemy champions less well. There is a benefit to this change, so can't hate. To game health, obviously it's a nerf to Aphelios. The Runan's Bolt pass through no longer deals damage to enemies they pass through. I'm glad they added the clarifying sentence because it took me like 3 reads to get this properly. Didn't know this was a thing, that the Bolt pass through dealt damage. Didn't realize that's obviously going to be somewhat meaningful. Aphelios really, his only real build is Infinity Edge into Hurricane second, so this will be impactful in the mid game and onwards. Also, the critical AoE is lesser, so you are less likely to hit things on the sides of the AoEs. The Runan splash missiles also are less wide, and the crit is less wide as well, right? So instead of it being 8 plus 8 plus 8, it's 6 plus 5 plus 5. Or even, instead of being 844, it's 833, etc., etc. Or 633. So this definitely has an impact, right? This overall lowers AoE. It specifically, and I believe the card works this way. I am not 100% certain. I'm not a big Aphelios player. I believe the splashes can overlap and multi-hit. I could be wrong about that, and I know there will be comments in YouTube below to correct me. You got that last time. I'm sorry I don't have your name for this one, but I saw the corrections from the last patch rundown, and I appreciate you for doing that. Thank you for everyone who did. There will be corrections in the comments below as well if Aphelios with Infernum can multi-hit, because I'm not certain. Regardless, if you can multi-hit, you are much, much, much less likely to be multi-hit, which is very meaningful. Also, this is absolutely very, very big deal. Holy crap, this champion have a ton of reach on Infernum. He sits there hitting melees, and you're like, oh, I just can't actually last hit right now. I'm just going to be autoed by Infernum Splash, so I guess I just can't play the lane anymore, from my experience. So this is actually really, really meaningful. This is going to be really felt in laning phase. And again, basically, it's just like, look, his single target damage has gone nowhere. Realistically, his single target damage has gone nowhere, but they have absolutely lowered his AoE, his ability to kind of accidentally deal a bunch more damage to other champions. The Hurricane Bolt pass through, the splash being less wide, the splash being less long. This is going to be meaningful. But again, the point still stands that only 2/5 of his guns have nerfs. So, 3/5 or 60% of his auto attacks and 3/5 of his spells were untouched. At a certain point, sure. If you only nerf the Q on Karthus, that is kind of still only 1/4 of his spells, but you're not nerfing his auto attacks, but only 1/4 of his auto attacks. That's the other part of it, really. Now, that said, this is only nerfing a spell, and this is, if they're only nerfing an auto attack, so they're nerfing 1 of 5 spells, and really 1 of 10 spells, because the ulti's no different. They're nerfing, 1 of his 10 spells. I think that's actually fair to say, and nerfing 1 of his 5 auto attacks. And only once you have Hurricane. So the patch, is, oh, wow, those are Aphelios nerfs. It's like, well, yeah, but. So the point, to a certain degree, still remains true that nerfs to Aphelios are almost always bigger on paper than they are in practice. I've given up saying that any given Aphelios nerf is enough to knock him out of pro, because we're just not there anymore. Aphelios, until they actually, do... and I will be clear that I do like these changes. I'm actually happy that Riot is doing the Thresh thing, where they're essentially trying to excise secondary mechanics off of abilities to get to a point where he becomes healthy. In my memory, Thresh took longer to get in a good spot than Aphelios has so far, so I don't even think Riot's doing a bad job here. I think they are continually keeping his solo queue win rate at about 48-49%, and they keep just knocking it back down to that line every patch, and just continually reacting to pro play. I still think that if they had actually thrown all these nerfs in all together 3 months ago, this champ would be dead and gone and no one would play him anymore, despite the fact that this champion is clearly going to still be viable after the set of changes. I just find that fascinating, I just find that absolutely fascinating. But yeah, here we are. because I'm just saying this because I think it's true, but like when you see 1,700 changes to a champion, you're like, yeah, we're out. Like that's gonna be the case, right? But they're doing 1% win rate nerf after 1% win rate nerf after 0.5% win rate nerf patch after patch after patch, and they kind of get there. Again, I think it's a solid change. Just fairly small, but that's okay. Caitlyn gets 2 AD and 5 move speed when we finally go to our first. Whew, that was bright. Our first data table. So 2 AD is obviously not the most massive thing in the world. Caitlyn is a champion who actually has very, very high base AD. Her total attack damage does not double over leveling, which is not that unusual, but a little high for a marksman to have 64 at level 1. That's okay. They are really trying to push that Caitlyn is an early game lane bully. I will say that I find Caitlyn is pretty successful in the mid to late game regardless, but this definitely pushes her early game the most. Keep in mind that her Q is a total attack damage ratio. Her W and E are vaguely auto attack resets, and headshot is also total attack damage ratio. So this 2 AD means more for Caitlyn than it does for, let's say, Tristana, who only has bonus AD ratios. Her Q is arguably a total AD ratio because it's attack speed that multiplies her total attack damage, but this is solid. This is a good 1% or so. 5 move speed can be really, really good, don't get me wrong. Caitlyn is going to be very strong. She's going to probably enter the pro meta as a result. She's going to be a probably top 5, top 4 solo queue champion. If you want some elo, pick Caitlyn. Legitimately, she's going to be quite good. Fiddlesticks, the world rejoices that lane Fiddle is getting a nerf. The healing is cut by 40% against minions. I actually played a game against lane Fiddle a couple days ago, and I was talking to my friends about it. And so I was looking at a bunch of numbers about him. I could have actually just put these numbers into a table and showed it to you, though the numbers at the end of the day would still be 40%. But he heals for 90 health off of a full 6 minion wave. My brain is small. He heals for 180 health over 2 seconds off of an entire minion wave, because rank 3 of the W is 30 per minion, was the old numbers. And that's becoming 18 per minion. Yes, that's the math. So healing for 18 per minion, and thus, your 180 healing gain is only 120. This changes the math a lot, where, it's not that hard to land 2 Karthus Qs and completely destroy Drain. If you're Aurelia or something, okay, there's a new math problem here of, can he Drain tank me? Is my DPS high enough? But if you're playing a ranged champion, let's call it Teemo or Xerath or, Ahri or whatever, it's well, now he can't really sustain against you as you take a second to walk back and then land your Q or whatever, and turns out you now dealt more damage than he healed, and now you're fine. This is really, really meaningful, because as long as he can channel W for 2 seconds and tank damage from you for 2 seconds and come out net 0 on health, he is at least allowed to play lane Fiddlesticks. Or I guess it, rather. The champion isn't it. It's allowed to succeed as a laner. As soon as that number goes negative, as soon as Fiddlesticks loses more health than you do when it QWs you walk out then cast spells, as soon as that calculus goes the other way, lane Fiddlesticks is just gone. This is not a Karthus Q where it's well, I trade back and it's not great, I've got to dodge skill shots. Fiddlesticks, in order to play this lane, must walk up and tank your full combo in order to do anything. The champion doesn't function unless it can do this, and as soon as you don't heal enough off the minion wave to survive, you're just gone. This change feels large enough that Fiddlesticks is probably just gone. There will be picks and matchups where it will work, but I believe pretty strongly that this change is large enough that Fiddlesticks can no longer hack it in most lane matchups. No longer blind pickable. I think the counter picks are probably all melee matchups that it can get max W duration. And certainly Jungle Fiddlesticks is fine. This is not going to affect jungle Fiddlesticks almost at all. Technically, yes, there's some healing when it goes for a lane gank or whatever. All ganks are in lanes, but I just mean ganking in lane, not walking down the lane and doing it. But yeah, this probably destroys a lot of the tank Fiddlesticks who just like AFKs in the wave and presses W. Next up, ability power ratios to Gragas. Ability power ratio buffs to Gragas on the W and the R. So I want to point out that these are hard to apply, right? Like you have to pre-channel W and then get him with body slam and then land it. This is not Q poke. This is, to be fair, some amount of wave clear. If you're playing, let's say, lane Gragas, also will point out that W is cast a lot when playing jungle Gragas. So if you are going for runic echoes, bam, here you go. Good stuff. Play it. Good stuff. And then the ulti, obviously, it's an ultimate, so like the cooldown's very, very long. And in general, ults tend to not have the most generous of AP ratios, so going up by 0.1, generous ratio is relative to its base damage. Going up by 0.1 is not that meaningful by comparison. So let's do some math here as we scroll down to Gragas. So here is the W. This is the ability that people max last, as far as I could tell. And the damage, of course, scales automatically with champion that you hit max health. I use Gragas as a stand-in, but hey, how much more damage is 100 ability power to, like, you know, quantify the ratio and something that we can kind of understand. Like, well, if you get 100 AP, which is, you know, runic echoes and a dark seal and runes basically, which is reasonable. Then yeah, you know, in the early-ish game when it's still rank 1, it's a 6% damage increase. That's not too bad, right? Obviously, the math is really easy. It's 10 flat damage per 100 AP in both cases. This is very easy to understand. That's going to be flat no matter what. But the base damage really is quite high in this ability, right? You know, you look at like a level 13, which is a solid like mid-game team fight for a jungler, maybe 20 minutes in or so. And it's 5% on one of your 4 abilities, and then 3% on one of your other 4 abilities. So, you know, to put it in other terms, a full AP Gragas combo does 20 more damage per 100 ability power. This is not massive, but I will again point out W is a primary trading tool in top lane, and it is a primary jungle clear tool in the jungle. This does have an impact. This does, to be fair, it does matter. This will change the math. This will buff Runic Echoes Gragas, and it will buff, you know, 2 Doran's Ring, Dark Seal, Quasi Tank, Top Gragas, with a Proto Belt and then maybe some tank items. That's a cool thing, right? It's just here's a modicum of extra damage, which I'm totally fine about. That sounds good. Shouldn't be meta breaking by any means. Next up, Aurelia gets more attack speed at levels 7 and onwards. I'm going to choose to use the max stack version of the passive to show the biggest amount that it could matter. So here we go with Aurelia. Again, first 6 levels, this is unchanged. There is no difference to this champion in the first 6 levels, but as soon as you max stack it, yeah, actually. Now, to be fair, yes, Aurelia's going to go Trinity Force. She's probably going to go Wit's End. There's, you know, maybe a Ruin King in there, you know, depending on the champion and the matchup, whatnot. But so even though she is going to include some more attack speed at some points in the build, the max stack passive is a pretty meaningful increase in total attack speed, even accounting for her base stats and whatnot. This is pretty solid. Now, are you always hitting full stacks of passive? No, but even on 1 stack of passive, you're still getting something. So this is, you know, some level of increased attack speed at all points. Once you hit level 7, I mean, literally land an ability on a thing and you're there. This is not hard for Aurelia to do. Q a minion then auto, cool, 1% more attack speed. You know, not horrible stuff regardless. So yeah, I think this is a solid change. Aurelia tends to be a little bit low win rate, so I'm happy to see Aurelia come up towards balanced. She can be frustrating to deal with. Obviously, she's decently strong as a champion. Like, when she's ahead, it can feel really frustrating because she has a lot of tools. She has a lot of agency for herself. But, hey, welcome to League of Legends. Some champions have really good kits. Like, it's, you know, not, I wouldn't say, like, keep Aurelia at 48% or anything, or 45%. I think it's, you know, it's fine for her to go up. And Riot's done a good job, I would say, overall, trying to reshape this champion to a spot where, you know, there are viable counter picks and you can withstand her damage. So generally pretty happy. Next up, small enough to Lee Sin, 2 seconds off Safeguard. Want to point out this is 1 second off Safeguard when not used on minions or wards. He gets like half the cooldown back, I think is the math, when he's casting it on something that gets the shield, so to an ally or to himself. So really it's 6 becomes 7, which percentage-wise is no different, but does matter some. I will say that his primary jungle path is to learn W at level 1 and self-cast it to start his camp. So his passive attack speed will run out, waiting for the second W cast to come up. This will slow down his jungling. This is less important when he learns Q, because now you have more abilities to press to keep the passive online, but this will overall lower his sustain. Less shields, less healing, less attack speed in the jungle. He will be a little bit slower and a little bit less durable coming out of the jungle. Facts. That's okay. I mean, Lee Sin is absolutely taking over pro. He's a top 3 jungler. Seems fine. Next up, Ornn loses 3 armor. Very easy hit here as well. Again, mostly to durability. I'm generally a fan of this. I will say 35. Last I looked, and my numbers are a little bit out of date. Last I looked, 35 was pretty much the median armor of a level 1 melee champion. Now, some of that is biased by the fact that all melee supports have like 47 armor. They have really, really, really absurd amounts of armor, which is, again, why I like consistency in base stats. That's why people say marksmen aren't very good in solo queue, is because Cassiopeia can actually hurt Braum and Ashe can't. It's okay. Like, that's not, like, why AD carries are bad according to Reddit, but something to point out is that, like, there's some champions who have, like, really, really absurdly out-of-line base stats. That's all. So 35 is the median melee armor. I will say that's also biased by the fact that, like, Talon and Kassadin have absurdly low base armor, and for good reason. I think Fizz is similar, where it's like, these are champions who are meant to be poked out by auto attacks. Like, I think, you know, to a certain extent, that's fine. So, you know, there's high end, there's low end, 35 is roughly the median. So Ornn is still near the median. So it's not like he's, you know, getting absurdly out of line or anything. I think it's a fine change. I think it's like, if I like care a lot about base stat consistency, this is within reason for like my absurdly stupid consistency requirements. So whatever. And yeah, as you can see, a flat 3 drop rounds to a 2% decrease in physical damage durability at all points in the game. I'm sure it's like, you know, 2.3 and then 1.8 or something in the late game. In fact, this is, you know, 1.5 becoming 1.4 down here as it finally hits 99. Overall, yeah, this lowers his durability in lane. Obviously, you can trade against him a little bit more with physical damage champions, which are, to be fair, most top laners, right? People are playing Jace and they're playing, I mean, maybe some more Aurelia now, Renekton and such. So yeah, it makes those matchups slightly better for them. In general, Ornn wants to recall as little as possible, and in fact relies on things like Doran's Shield to sustain through. And base armor is a very good way to make Doran's Shield less effective, because Doran's Shield gives you flat health regen, which kind of implicitly multiplies off of your armor and MR. So yeah, Ornn will survive rough matchups less well. Cool. Rakan gets a sometimes buff, sometimes not to his passive cooldown. Instead of being reduced every 2 levels, it's reduced every level. So you have a kind of funky color changing passive cooldown here. So yeah, it's sometimes better, sometimes exactly the same. Every even level, Rakan is buffed. Every odd level, he's not. That said, again, the fact that his shield comes up faster on level 2 means that he might have it up when he's level 3, when he wouldn't have initially. So, like, you know, little small things like that. Yeah, really, really small Rakan buff. I mean, this is the kind of thing where it's like, how can we give him 0.5% win rate this way? It's fine. This isn't going to change a lot. Like, this is fairly small, I would say, overall. Also, gotta point out that, like, Rakan does have cooldown resetting on the passive in the kit, right? It's when you land stuff on enemy champions, you get the passive back a bit faster. So an additive 1.5 second buff to the cooldown can actually be pretty meaningful when you actually have the cooldown by 10 more seconds. And so, you know, 28 to 26.5 is actually 18 to 16.5, which, yeah, is actually not that bad of a change. It's actually pretty meaningful. Might come up in time. So, yeah, this can matter. Again, it's pretty small, though. Don't mind seeing it. It's just very, very small. Next up is Shen getting 20 flat shield on his passive. Much like Rakan, kind of same mechanic here. Shen can get his passive back up more quickly over the course of fights by attacking and landing spells and such. I have a friend that I play League with who has over 1 million mastery points on Shen, and I told him the buff, and he's like, holy crap, that's like 120 health during a team fight. So in his mind, or maybe it was 60, I don't remember. I think it made us at 60. But like in his mind, like the expected value of the Shen passive is getting it off 3 times in a fight. So yeah, and obviously like in any given, you know, lane trade, it's 20 more health on most of those trades if you can press the button in time. Obviously this is meaningful, right? So here is Shen's passive shield before and after. Obviously, really, really, really meaningful in the early game. This like fully stops a rank 1 ability and sometimes a rank 2 ability. Yeah, I mean, the numbers are pretty good. Even at late game, it's still 20% more. And for fun, I said, okay, what about if you have 1,000 bonus health? 1,000 bonus health. Like you've got Sunfire and Titanic, and probably there's some runes, adding in the last little bit. But that's like a pretty solid, like, you've got a lot in the mid game. To be at Sunfire Titanic is, 7,000 into your build, counting boots. Like that's a pretty decent investment. That's a good amount of money. That's probably close-ish to 20 minutes in. Okay. Whatever. I mean, you're around here, when this happens, I think probably. And it's still a 10% or so increase, right? That like the numbers increase is so good that honestly, yeah, it's still about a 10% increase in durability. Because the health ratio is 14%, so it's 140 bonus for 1,000 bonus HP. It's 140 bonus health, or bonus shielding, I should say. And yeah, still really meaningful, right? This is a very big increase in the shield power. This is going to be felt. This is quite nice. This is a really big buff to Shen, and Shen is overall a strong performer in top lane. Shen is going to be an incredibly, incredibly strong performer in top lane. And this feels to me a little bit like Riot is adding a new top lane tank to pro play. He is going to be OP in solo queue, and he is going to be in pro play. This is a very good buff. Next up, we've got Skarner changes. Okay, E now goes full speed through minions. That's going to feel really good for getting ganks off. It's going to feel really good for top lane Skarner because hitting E through minions on an enemy champion now sounds possible. Mana cost, to be fair, flattened towards the higher side on the queue. Not a huge deal for the jungle. Matters probably very little for top lane overall, to be fair. Buff duration a bit longer can help, I would say mostly lower elo jungling to help make sure the queue doesn't fall off between camps. I'm a fan of this just like being long enough that it's functionally always on, but at least requires, some time when you first start a scrap. To say, look, your combat pattern is going to be a little bit slow. Like, that's okay. The big change, of course, is the damage has been completely retooled from 33 to 45% total attack damage to only 15% total attack damage, but 1 to 3% target max health. Now, I want to point out that by maxing Crystal Slash, you are only gaining 50% more damage, right? 50% more total damage and 50% more attack damage scaling. The math says, or I should say the data says, the statistics say, that Skarner should be maxing Q last. And Skarner, by the way, is split about 50-50 between maxing Q first and maxing E first. And maxing E first is far, far, far stronger, and yet they're picked about equally. So Skarner has an artificially deflated win rate via bad skill orders. It's a deflated win rate because half of all Skarners are maxing Q when they shouldn't. If you max E, you are more powerful, and it's not close. Which means Skarner is actually very powerful, but people are playing him wrong. Which means if Riot could simply make a change that forced E max, Skarner would gain like 2% win rate, and people would be like, oh my god, this champ's OP. Just saying, that is very true with Skarner here. This change is interesting because a couple things are happening. On the one hand, is the damage going up by 50%? Well, maybe, because the health damage is tripling, but the AD is not increasing anymore. So it depends which one does more of the heavy lifting. If this is worth at least half the damage, that means you are tripling half the damage, which means you are going from, let's see, 1.1 is 2, or sorry, 1 plus 1 is 2, 1 plus 3 is 4, you are doubling the damage, right? Which means you're doubling the damage instead of adding 50% to the damage, which means that if this is worth half the damage, you have increased the reason to max Q. The other interesting part, though, is I will say attack damage scales slower than health scales, right? In general, as a vague rule of thumb, champion attack damage roughly doubles from level 1 to level 18. There's some variance here, but it's roughly accurate. AD roughly doubles, which means that, without investment, you're going from dealing 33 damage to dealing 90 damage, right? 1x to double, 33 to 90 is roughly tripling. Because AD roughly doubles, you are roughly tripling the damage. In the real world, by the late game, Crystal Slash deals triple damage than it did in the early game. Okay, that's that part of the math. And because I want to point out one more thing real quick, because jungle Skarner and even top Skarner is not likely to hit level 18, like this just generally doesn't happen, you've got to decide, do I need to max it at least second? Like, do I need max Q by late game? Because as attack damage scales, a 50% increase in damage by primary damage tool might be good enough because I've got more AD or whatever. Well, the rule of thumb for health is that health roughly quadruples over the course of a game, which means this is becoming 1 and this is becoming 12, right? This is 33 becomes 90 because the underlying attack damage doubles. This is 1 becomes 12 because the underlying health of my target quadruples. So now you're like, oh, wow, I really care about getting these points off. Not only does the actual scaling triple, which obviously means I want those points in at some point, but the stat I'm looking at to ascertain what my damage is increasing as well, right? So in those terms, just sort of in an explanatory term, this is generally kind of like worse in the early game and better in the late game, and probably something you want to max at latest second. So now, and hey, by the way, real quick, the secondary damage is exactly the same. So the math I'm doing here, by the way, is only the first half. I am not including both halves. I could, but it's just doubling both sides, and it doesn't really matter. So here is finally the Skarner Q damage data table. Assuming you max Q last, it is indeed weaker the whole time until you finally put points into Q. Now, is that somewhat unrealistic? Yeah, probably. That probably is unrealistic. And to be fair, yeah, we should probably change that. So let's change, what is it? We're going to change the letter before O is N. So let's change this to maxing it second. Oh, wait, no, sorry. It's... If we max it second, and I believe it did this correctly, I could be wrong. Okay, did it correctly. If we max it second, we get this, right? And we say, okay, well, here's this. Okay, actually, let's go back 2 steps before we do that. Okay, so we're in the old version, right? So if you max it last, you're honestly not getting level 14 in most points of the game, and so this is purely a nerf to your champion. And here's, by the way, the quick data table of, because the AD ratio is nerfed by, 0.18 or so, how much health does my target need to have for this to be better? Obviously, as we can see, Skarner's base AD scales up automatically over time. So the amount of health I need my target to have for this to be as good also scales up over time. And yeah, it gets closer, right? Because health scaling increases faster than attack damage scaling. This gets closer over time. But as we kind of showed, this is objectively a nerf to Skarner unless you actually max that ability. And so let's move this around. Let's do this. Let's see, we're maxing it second. I believe I did this correctly. Let's hope. And hey, here we are. This isn't quite so bad anymore, right? This is suddenly actually a fairly doable bit of math. And in fact, at 3 points into the ability, because this is rank 2 and this is rank 3, at 3 points into Q at level 10, that's not too late into the game. We're already there. The ability is already stronger. Okay, yeah, great. Again, because health scaling outstrips attack damage scaling. And if we really tried to go, okay, what if we really, really max it first, which again is objectively a far, far lower win rate build, well, where do we end up here? Change the N's to M's, and let's do this all once again. And it still takes rank 4 of the ability to be a buff, right? So what are we saying with all of this ultimately? That even if you're putting points in Q early on, your early game is still weaker, just outright, right? The math is really not up for debate. At least if you're hitting a champion with this much health. Now I will say they didn't seem to include a monster cap. Now there might be a monster cap they didn't include here in the stuff here, But what that means is, well, if it takes 1,000 health to equal, guess how much health a red buff has? It's more than 1,100. So he's objectively faster at killing Krugs and red and blue and Gromp. Big Wolf is at least close. And honestly, for the things like the small chickens, the small wolves, they're probably getting burned down anyway by the damage being enough. So it's a buff to his jungle clear. Now again, I don't really think this champion should probably max his ability first. I'm going to try to get back into the part where he was maxing it second, which is that. That's probably the more realistic skill build for him. It's probably still E-max into Q-max. I think you do want to max this out by max rank because, look, as soon as we max out Q, at level 13, it is 25% more damage, becoming eventually 35% more damage. And yes, if you buy a lot of attack damage, you're losing out, right? You're eventually losing out on 30% total AD, which means, hey, this does 14 more damage, which is 30% of like 50. With 50 bonus AD, this is back to being a nerf, which is literally just Warrior. Well, guess what? At this point, Riot's telling you, Warrior Skarner's bad. Triforce is probably okay, but you're going Triforce Cinderhulk. Just get off of it. Again, I will say they have increased the incentive to max Q. At the end of the day, Q max last is almost certainly wrong. It is a very substantial bump in his damage profile to max Q, and so you should. And you should probably max it second, because ultimately, right, the heavy lifting of the damage, because here's something else that I forgot to bring up. I forgot that I had this, but here we are. This is how much damage Skarner is getting. This is assuming you're maxing it last, and yeah, you probably should be maxing it second, but you know, we can again do this if we need to. This is again, wait, it's not that actually. Rather, we're switching the letter O to the letter N. That I believe is accurate. And then yeah, this is just N115. Great. So this is basically like saying, look, if this is your ability, this is how much health your target has. This is how much damage you're getting from pure attack damage, right? 50% of his total AD. It again roughly doubles over time. And then hey, if you're maxing it second, right? In the early game, you're, less than half of the damage for a long time is from health scaling, right? Even at 1,000 health, less than half your damage is coming from health scaling. So if you are tripling less than half your damage, it's getting, you're getting there. So once people's health is high enough for the health scaling to matter, right, and be a significant portion of the damage, once it's there and that matters, by the way, rank 1 here would be like 12, right? Not 17. Once the health scaling is half the damage, then you finally care. And that's when you start maxing it, right? Which is around, these levels. And so maxing it second seems to line up, and then bam, here we go. Most of your damage is from opposing health scaling. And, less than 1/4 of your damage by end game comes from your total AD. So there you go. Probably max Q second on Skarner. This should be a jungle clear speed buff and a late game damage increase. Tank Skarner, E-max first Skarner is already the better build. This should push you towards doing that because there is less of a reason to go Warrior. Triforce is not really any weaker. If you want to, you can. Q-max second is the new build. Took a lot of time on that. Let's move on. Swain gets some spicy changes that are pretty fun. I actually like playing Swain quite a lot. So first off, there are some changes. So movement speed is being nerfed by 10. Ravenous Flock no longer restores mana. And you can't pull off Blast Cone, which to be fair, Blast Cone's triggered by themselves or their teammates. But I assume... Hold on, okay. This is, I think, vague wording. Can no longer pull enemies launched by Blast Cones triggered by themselves. Okay, so if your enemy's Blast Cone or your enemy teammate's Blast Cone, you can't yoink them. If you Blast Cone your enemies, you can. I accept that. Okay, so let's talk about this. 10 less movement speed, no more mana restore on Ravenous Flock, and okay, this is, sure, like, I accept this being janky. So some early nerfs. Now, I will say, I don't mind this going away as someone who enjoys playing Swain. Random mana restore mechanic is a little random. I'm okay with this going away. I think it's fine. Let him have real mana cost. Let him have a real mana pool. Let him handle mana like every other champion does, which is they got to spend mana the way they need to spend it. What I like is they've made the passive cooldown, instead of going 12-9-6, scaling with champion level, it's 10 flat, which is a buff for the first 6 levels, and then with at least 10 CDR is a buff for the next 6 levels, and then if you don't have 40 CDRs, then nerf from 13 onwards. But, okay, passive is flattened to 10, and the E cooldown is also flattened to 10, and the cost went down, which means E and the passive now always share a cooldown, and I absolutely love that. This is smart. This is good. I like this a lot. If you can yoink with E, you can always yoink with E, because of course E scales with CDR, and the passive also scales with CDR. I personally don't mind the inconsistency of some passive scale off CDR and some don't. I think that's okay. Yeah, in general, I'm okay with it. Like, as though my opinion matters, I think this is fine, and I want to encourage you all to believe this is fine as well. I think this is a totally acceptable tool for designers to use to make things interesting. Okay, what are the other changes? Well, Q cooldown down by 1 second, and there are 2 less degrees per bolt, so the fan's going from this to that, right? I mean, overall, it's, condensed into 80% of the area, roughly, right? So cool, yeah. And they pass through champions. So now Q is a full pass-through ability. Q has full pass-through on all targets, which means if Renekton's frontlining you, you can still hit him and the Ahri behind him. This is obviously a massive buff, right? The angle is a buff, which means, your single targets went up. Your wave clear went up. You can hit cast more reliably. The cooldown got better, obviously. And pass through champions because you can double hit and wave clear, right? So like when Fizz gets in your face and fights you, you can still hit him and still clear the wave. Like this is very, 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 very big. This is the single biggest buff of the patch. And is very meaningful. Absolutely hugely meaningful. Really big change to Swain. There is also a change to Swain's W, which we already know you're supposed to max W second. Some people maxed every move and they were wrong. But they're saying, hey, look, the only rank up on E now is, in fact, flat damage. They're saying, hey, don't rank up E. You're only getting, it's like 50 total damage per rank up on like both halves of E, which is like not nothing, but obviously not worth ranking. I actually wouldn't have minded this to still have a scaling cost, because you're not going to get, +5 mana cost until level 14 anyway. And one way designers can subtly tell players don't rank this is to keep the scaling mana cost. Like, I wouldn't mind this saying this goes 50 to 70 or even 50 to 90 to say, look, don't rank this. Don't rank this. Now, that said, if you are wrong and rank it second, you are less punished because your mana cost doesn't increase. So there's something on that side as well. I believe the correct choice is to let someone read the level up tooltip and say, oh, I'm getting a mana cost and damage increase. This gives me range and damage. Okay, yeah, I'll pick, I think helping players make the right choice via the level up tooltip is actually the better design choice. Again, not 100% certain, because letting a player be less punished for the wrong choice is also a good option. So, not sure. Regardless, Riot is very clearly telling you, leave this at 1 point. You don't have a reason to rank this. Totally acceptable. So the big change to W is to say, look, the range is absurd now. And this is a really, really, really long range. Like, this is incredible. The damage, though, is down by 20%. The mana cost, which is, again, them trying to say in the patch notes, hey, go ahead and rank W second. The mana cost, instead of increasing by 15 per rank, only increases by 10 per rank. And to be fair, considering the damage is down, yeah, the damage per mana, right? This is what, 2.5 to 1, and it's 2 and a third to 1, and this is arguably worse than 2 and a third to 1. This actually probably the damage mana ratio actually got worse here, but I'll take that because the range went absurdly up. So let's quickly summarize the changes. Move slower, no mana restore, no pull on enemies, whatever. You're getting a free 3 seconds off of Never Move. 3 seconds off Never Move, and 10 mana off Never Move. So, objective flat buff Never Move for the entirety of the game. Like, I don't care about rank 5 Never Move being worse. Level 18, I don't care. Doesn't matter. Ravenous Flock, as far as the effective cooldown, buffed. Because, well, Never Move is more available. So that means Ravenous Flock for the pull is more available. Still skills off your W, of course, no big problem. But like this and this are objective buffs. This is an objective buff. This is objectively a nerf, and this is sideways. The damage is in fact lower. The combo off your E, pull, CC chain is in fact lower, but you can annoy the crap out of enemy junglers. Man, do you want a deep ward? Oh, our deep ward's gonna be fun. So you can just like hit the Renekton in top lane. Just be a jerk, just poke that guy up there when you're in a combo. I would love to see this become really commonplace and be like, hey, I'm going for a trade. Ready? Go, I'm stunning. And it's like, that sounds great. That sounds like so much fun. I really, really want to be involved in that. That sounds amazing. In a world where jungle Swain is played, you can have your Hunter's Talisman and just W the chickens from across the map and just gain 120 health. I'm not sure if jungle Swain's good with this, but if it is, hey, there you go. I'm not saying it's going to happen. You could also, I guess, technically, like, play Smite on mid Swain and buy a Talisman and just occasionally W chickens for health. Don't think it's correct. But, you know, if you wanted to. Although that would actually ruin you because by having a Talisman, you'd be subject to funnel penalty. So you don't want to do it. Either way, now let's look at some of the math more specifically. Again, so here is the passive in E lined up together, right? Obviously, again, the E buff is on for the entirety of the game. Even though the passive is technically nerfed at some point on, I would say very often Swain gets 10 CDR. You can go Roa, but I often see Luden's Echo, Lost Chapter, GLP, things like that. Also, you have the ability to go for Zonias, which obviously you want probably second or third, which to be fair, you're not getting Zonias at level 7. If you really want, you could sidestep the Fiendish Codex, but that's probably not happening either. So yeah, it's actually going to take a while for this to come online. But again, the primary constraint on casting this was being able to cast Never Move, which is up far more often. So functionally, this, even in these levels, is still a buff. And I'm going to defend that very strongly. Q cooldown, obviously down by 10 to 25%. This means it is a 33% DPS increase on Q spam. Swain wants to be a short-range, high DPS, high uptime mage. A 33% DPS increase on your primary damage ability, which is both the base damage and the AP ratio, is a very, very, very large buff. This is absolutely meaningful. This is a huge buff. I cannot understate this enough. This is a huge buff to Swain. This matters a ton. And then for funsies, yep, it's a 20% damage cut to the W. Again, the AP ratio is unchanged, so that flattens that a little bit. And then, yes, the range is up absurdly large amounts. This is, I think, the really fun part of Swain's kit. It's cool to see this. It's not like this ability does double damage because you can cast it in twice as many places. That's not really what's going to happen here. But situationally, you will find cool stuff to do. This opens up a bit more, fun stuff. This is just going to be kind of an enjoyable change for Swain, even though it's not that power positive. Thresh should be maxing Dark Passage second, and so let's take a look at win rate and stuff. As a result, he is like the #1 support in pro play. He is strong in solo queue, and maxing Dark Passage second is the higher win rate and pro play focused build, and so they're nerfing maxing W second. I would say that if they went for linear level scaling, just 22, 20, 18, 16, 14, this wouldn't have been enough of a nerf to change anything. And so I totally, even though I really don't like decimals in cooldown scalings, and I, think that they should try to avoid them when possible, and realistically, you can find a balanced Thresh without decimals in this. They're saying, look, let's just make the easy change, which is let's just cut 1 second off the cooldown increase per rank up. And so here you go, max it second, pretty substantial increase to Lantern cooldown. I mean, level 13 is pretty late game for a Thresh. And yeah, 16 seconds becoming 12 seconds, or vice versa, I should say. Yeah, you're going to feel that, right? It takes another 4 seconds for the Lantern to come back out. That is going to be felt. That is going to be meaningful. That second save in a team fight is much less likely. This matters. Will Thresh still be a top pick in pro play? Absolutely. Will it nerf his win rate? A little bit. Unless they're maxing W last, in which case it won't. Which is fine. TF is going to be weaker for the first 12 levels of the game because Pick a Card has an increased cooldown. Without looking, I was pretty sure you max W second because Q max is your wave clear. Without looking, I'm still going to stand behind that. Yeah, I mean, this is meaningful, right? First 7 levels, a full 2 seconds increase. It really hurts his mana restore. It hurts his wave clear because the Q cooldown is shorter than this, so you can throw wild cards and then you're just going to wait on red card. If you are able to outplay gold card or you see him throw the card and hit a minion, this heavily increases the window you can use to try to abuse him in lane. You are going to feel this. It is going to be felt. And especially in pro play, when pros are, generally speaking, pretty good at abusing cooldown deficiencies. Yeah, this is gonna be meaningful. Yuumi now has % mana restore on the passive. And the cooldown is slightly shorter, which is nice. So, here's the passive cooldown change really quickly. Level 18 Yuumi is basically impossible, so don't worry about it. But, in the first few levels, like in the laning phase, still meaningful, still felt, right? Over 10%, yeah, this is a substantial amount of the cooldown. I mean, she should be attacking, once per wave or twice per wave. That's not going to happen very often, but, they're really trying to push her to do this, right? Yuumi is objectively underpowered right now. Now, in pro play, pros are getting around it. They're still playing her mostly with things like Ezreal, but they are still playing Yuumi some. This is like the right kind of choice, by the way. Also the buff to the passive, but we'll do that second. Because Yuumi is untargetable so much of the game, the more Riot can force her to be targetable, the healthier this champion is and less frustrated this champion is. Like if they did something like add a mandatory 3-second cooldown where if she deals or takes damage while out of her teammate. So like she triggers her passive or gets autoed by a Jinx rocket or something, and it's like, yep, you can't jump in. You played the risk. That's probably too aggressive and too egregious, and that's probably too much, but like those are the kinds of things that would make Yuumi less frustrating, is to say, hey, you need to be targetable at some points of the game, because that's usually most players' frustration with a champion. It's less the healing and less the poke. It seems to be more, I can't do anything about this champion, which I understand. And obviously being untargetable is meant to be a core part of her kit and core part of the strength, and I think it's, defensible that she's untargetable for most of the game. But Riot is trying to say, look, if there is going to be counterplay, it's when she hops out of the host, and so we're gonna make hopping out of the host more rewarded and more required, because again, she's objectively weak, and so she gets to hop out more often to try to find more opportunities, because the opportunities are stronger. So comparing pre to post patch, here is the amount of extra mana sustain that she gets through the passive without getting a single mana rune or any bonus mana of any kind. The mana gained is up about 15%. Again, the very end game is really unlikely. This isn't really, maybe from here onwards is not a realistic Yuumi game. But yeah, I mean, 14% in a very early game, and it remains about 14% for like the entirety of the laning phase, and then, crests out a little bit higher at 15 plus. And yeah, this is a meaningful amount of bonus mana. Just hard facts. This is a meaningful amount of bonus mana. This is roughly about as much mana increase as the E cost was, by the way. The math roughly lines up that one new passive accounts for one new E. Seems reasonable. On the other side, of course, we talked about how absurdly much her E was nerfed with the more common build, or most common build and strongest build, of Mana Flow banned into Presence of Mind. And that made the cost, double in some cases and still, increase by a ton in the late game. Well, we can see a similar data table here for how much her mana restore is better with both those runes fully stacked up, which will happen, in the late game. And yeah, 75 more mana at a level 9 bop and block, right? It nearly doubles in that case. Like Riot saying, look, if you want to be as strong as before we nerfed you really, really hard, hop out and land an auto attack. Go do this. This is a great place for Riot to try to push the sustain. And this is why, by the way, and we talked about this a little bit in the previous one with the nerfs to Yuumi, is, and same with Pyke, is like, in a lot of cases, you cannot cause there to be weaknesses in a champion by inflating their base stats and costs. I don't think it's really realistic. I don't think it really happens, and it didn't in this case with Yuumi. Like, the E costs a lot, and her mana pool is really, really big to try to make flat mana gains not good enough. Lo and behold, the real fix that helps the champion is to put it in the ability tooltips. Your E cost percent max mana. Your passive restores percent max mana. That's the way through it. That is the way through it. As Riot moves on, it continues to design stuff in League of Legends. We get more and more evidence that base stats are not really your way to design weaknesses because it just doesn't do a very good job of it. It just doesn't in general. The movement is too slight in a lot of cases. You put it in the tooltip and it works differently. And then even when you try with things like that, like Jinx Rockets, Jinx Rocket scales better for attack speed than Minigun does. That's a different topic. We'll get into it later. But like, because the way Jinx Rocket is handled is, well, it's actually in base stats. And Minigun is also handled in base stats. Functionally anyway. Moving on. I like the changes. I think it's a really good set of changes. I'm really glad that the way Riot landed on trying to, cap, mana Yuumi is percent mana costs. Good choice. Happy about it. I think it's a good change, right? Buffing Yuumi by making her hop out of the host. Super love it. Great changes. VFX updates to Ahri and Udyr. Cool stuff. I like it. Spellthief and Frostfang each get 25% more base mana regen, and Shard of True Ice gets 5 more ability power. Definitely have come to notice that Relic Shield is definitely better than Spellthief's, unless you are the far more aggressive lineup and you have absolute control over your lane where you are poking them with impunity, which means you can toss out spells, you can feel safe to hit their turret to gain 45 gold there. You're tossing out so many spells because you're poking that you really want the mana regen. You're just like, I am Zyra, I am Brand, let's do this. Then yeah, you know what? Let's do it. Let's go Spellthieves. What's interesting is this change does not help the champion's safety in any way. It just says, look, you can spam harder, right? You can just jam Qs out on Soraka. You can jam Qs out on Sona. And if it hits you back, you can heal back up with a bit more mana regen. And then look, there's a late game payoff of 5 more ability power. The risk was worth it. I actually would almost like to see, because to be honest, being in a rough matchup and having to deal with Spellthief and Frostwing really freaking sucks. Like, those lanes are really annoying. Now, to be fair, maybe they should be. Maybe they should be really annoying because it's the riskier play style and they deserve to get paid off. I accept that. I mean, I'm also someone who likes playing Zyra, so, I'm a benefit here. Or I'm benefited here. What I really like is this payoff. Because Spellthief is objectively the riskier play style, right? Relic Shield does not require interaction with your opponent. It doesn't. It just says, hey, you know what? Last hit a minion every wave or two. It's fine. You can play backline. You don't have to cast any spells. You can spend 0 mana the entire laning phase. And as long as you're ready to counter-engage Leona by throwing out a Jano Tornado or putting the Silence Field down or whatever, you don't have to do anything. And you're getting perfect gold income. And that is the sort of core problem with... I still accept it because Relic should at least require slightly more gameplay than Coin. Debatably. I would argue Coin required more gameplay than ranged champions do with Relic Shield. Ancient Coin at least required ranged champions to walk up to where the coins were and grapple with that, because occasionally, you could see like a Thresh Flay or something to go for it. But it also really punished the losing lane. Relic Shield allows you to play a losing lane gracefully as an enchanter, and ultimately, I will say, I think Relic Shield's a better item than Coin, even for enchanters. It's a better design item, it's a more interesting item, and I'm a big fan of simplification. Big fan of simplification. Either way, I will say, the payoff for this item, I really feel should be in the late game. To say, look, I wouldn't mind if Shard of True Ice never gained any more bonus health, like it stayed at like the 50 or whatever Frostfang had, and had like 70 ability power. To say, look, you're gonna risk it to play a squishier support item that's harder to stack in lane, or at least can be. You know what? Let's play that up. We're gonna give you a payoff for it. Now I realize again, there's a subset of champions where they're always going Shard of True Ice or Spellthieves anyway, and they're going to make that choice regardless of these balance changes, right? Zyra's getting that no matter what, basically. Arguably, Sona in most matchups is doing that anyway, unless you're against, Leona. But there's something about it that makes me say, look, if this item is still fundamentally too risky, you know, get to the point where it's 60-40 and let players opt into the risk because it's a payout. And just balance Zyra around the fact that Shroud of True Ice is OP. I think it's okay. I think it's totally doable. Just a thought. Yeah, we're good. Unsealed Spellbook also gets a nerf here. The initial cooldown is up by a pretty substantial amount, by a full minute, and the maximum cooldown cap is up by 30 seconds, and the amount of cooldown reduction you gain per swap is up by 5 seconds. So here we go. Here's the Unsealed Spellbook. And by the way, yep, it's up 25% at all points in time. For some reason... Oh, right, I have 19 rows here, that's why. So this is just going to show you here, like, okay, your very first summoner swap, you have swapped 0 summoners, 240 becomes 300, which is 25% increase. You know, minus 20, minus 25, down it goes, down it goes, down it goes, right? It still caps, by the way, on 6 summoners taken. Once you've taken your 6th summoner, you're at cooldown cap, which is still up 25%. Now, the interesting part here is, okay, to get this many summoners, how long would it take you? In minutes, right? Obviously, well, for the first 4 or the first 5 minutes, you have 0 bonus summoners, right? 4 becomes 5. You know, you only have 1 bonus summoner from 7, almost 8 minutes, to 9, almost 10 minutes. Basically, how long in before I can get to the next one, right? At 4 minutes, I can get to the next one. At almost 8 minutes, I can get to the next one. At 11, I can get to the next one. At 14, I can get to the next one. And then it's every 2 minutes, every 2 minutes, every 2 minutes, every 2 minutes. Obviously, this is every 2.5. So what I find interesting is the average league game is probably like, let's say 33 minutes long. So you would get 12 summoners with old Spellbook. You get 9 summoners with new Spellbook. Let's say you're rushing to level 6. Or let's say, you know, let's talk about when Dragon Soul comes up. Okay, if you're rushing Dragon Soul, 21 minutes. 6 versus 4 free summoners, right? And in general, it's always a 25% increase, which is a 1/3 decrease in summoners gained, right? Pretty much. I think that math lines up. Whatever if it doesn't. Who cares? It's close enough, right? It's a 25% increase in number of summoners, or an increase of cooldown. So yeah, you know, it's about 25% less summoners gotten overall. Math is close enough to accurate. Let's just move on before I make myself feel even more stupid. But it's around there. That's about the numbers. So yeah, I mean, you can kind of see here the material number of fewer summoners, and it's like pretty easily measured. Like you are going to have fewer summoners here, outright. And this is a meaningful nerf. Spellbook has been taking over pro play pretty quickly. Recently, it's been taking over sort of like high elo as well. This is a very, very, very strong keystone. And yes, it has become a dominant choice. So yeah. Because of course, one thing to point out is Spellbook is not a keystone in the first 4 or 5 minutes, which means obviously you are without a keystone for that whole thing while your opponent does. And so saying, hey, you have now 5 minutes to abuse your opponent without them having a keystone. You know, can you do it? What can you do? Go for it. And I think that's cool. Like, it's kind of interesting. And then Nexus Blitz coming out. Cool stuff. Big pog. We have buffs in Nexus Blitz as a result. We have buffs and nerfs in ARAM as a result. Great. Bug fixes and QOL stuff. Fun stuff there as well. Cool beans. Well, we are an hour and 3 minutes in, so it's time for the patch 10.15 TLDR. And let's talk about it. These nerfs are almost all pro-facing, except for Fiddlesticks, who is just very, very annoying and slightly strong. Cool to see Ranked Flex have no cap on elo difference, which is going to make it, you know, you're going to have some weird matches, but I think it's a good change all the same. Be able to play with your friends. Aphelios Chakram Turret has worse activation, but the actual DPS and I believe actual range is unchanged. Infernum has overall less splash AoE. I don't know if they can multi-hit, but YouTube comments below should tell you if they do. Because if they can multi-hit, then this is a very big nerf, even bigger nerf to the Flamethrower, because multi-hitting was a huge DPS gain. And hey, nice buff bug fix to Moonlight Vigil. Caitlyn gets 2 AD and 5 boost speed, is a very, very nice buff. Caitlyn should be very strong next patch. Tank Fiddlesticks is maybe dead, because this probably breaks a point where he can survive getting poked by trying to take down a wave. Every 100 ability power is 10 flat damage on W and 10 flat damage on R. Pretty moderate buff. I'm not expecting Deathcap Gragas anytime soon, but, you know, might see some more, Runic Echoes and Proto Belts and Doran's Rings and stuff, which is cool. Relic, it's actually pretty moderate attack speed in the mid game. 6% at 7+, and 10% at 13+. This is actually pretty meaningful. This is a pretty solid buff. Lee Sin functionally gets 1 second increase in the cooldown of Safeguard because you get half off when you self-target or go to a teammate. Ornn, 3 armor is going to make his bad matchups even worse where he can get poked out. Cool changes there as well. Rakan, basically every odd level is a 1.5 second cooldown buff to his passive, which is nice to see. Pretty small overall. These all feel like fairly small changes. They don't mean a ton, but that's okay. Shen's changes feel pretty big. This, I think, is a really meaningful increase to his durability. Even with a lot of bonus health, this is still a 10% increase roughly to his shield strength, which is quite nice. And ultimately, yeah, this puts him in a spot where I think he's very, very strong. With Ornn moving down in priority, Shen can easily move up as a dominant top-tier pro play top tank. Skarner gets a big reshape on his Q. Functionally, his PvP damage is lower in the early game. His jungle clear is faster in the early game. You should max Q second and not later, and almost certainly not earlier either. You should max E first, which, hey, by the way, E is buffed, so get those points in, make that ability happen. Max Q second, because that's when people have enough health for the Q damage to matter. Again, faster jungle clear, weaker early laning to play lane Skarner, but this man will deal more damage once you max Q. I will say, attack damage Skarner is gone. Attack damage Skarner was already the weaker Skarner anyway, so don't play it. Tank Skarner is going to be probably OP this patch. Tank Skarner is probably free low. You should play it. And max Q second. Swain gets some nerfs and some buffs. My vote is he's overall stronger, 10 less move speed, which is, okay, exists. No mana restore on the Ravenous Flock, and you can't pull enemies that they self-launch from Blast Cone. But what we've got here is the Yoink now has the same cooldown as the buffed Never Move cooldown, which is a really, really, really big deal. A lot more Never Moves, a lot more Yoinks. Big deal there. Q is objectively stronger. It now passes through enemy champions. The angle is narrower, which gives you better multi-hitting, and the cooldown is substantially better, which is a 33% DPS increase in the late game. Really, 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 really big deal. This is a massive buff, a really, really huge deal. So Q has been buffed, and passive has been functionally buffed. Mana cost, a little bit different, sure. Well, the E is cheaper, and the W that you max second is cheaper, so it'll help make up for the mana cost differences. And by the way, those are the spells that you cast to get the mana restore, so it kind of got paid for it anyway. Anyway, the last thing we're going to say is W does 20% less damage, at least on the base, but has a massively increased range, which should be interesting. Should be fun to watch for. Should be pretty cool. Thresh, his strongest max second is Dark Passage. That has been nerfed by 4 seconds at max rank. If you max it last, you won't notice this. Twisted Fate nerfed in the first 12 levels of the game until you can finish maxing W. Pretty substantial nerf to his early laning power. And just overall, yeah, you're going to get less mana restore off of blue card. You're going to get less wave clear off of red card because the spell's not up as often. Yuumi is being pushed towards using her passive, which means she has to hop out of her host in order to go auto attack, get some mana back, get the shield, and hop back in. The more that Riot can push her being targetable, the more healthy Yuumi is, so please keep doing this. Good change. Also want to note that, yes, indeed, they are using % max mana as the new balance lever for Yuumi, as they should have from the very beginning. VFX updates to Ahri and Udyr, cool stuff. Spellthiefs and co getting buffed very slightly, which helps. For champs who are always going to run it, like Zyra and Brand, that's probably not going to change anything. But for the champions who are on the fence, like, it's kind of a hard matchup, but I think I can do it. I like that you're getting paid off, right? You're getting a payoff for it. You're getting 5 more AP to play the riskier item. I think that's cool. In general, this item should be higher statted than Relic Shield, which it kind of already was because of the stat skew, right? Like, how often does Soraka need 150 more flat health compared to getting 30 more ability power, right? Like, those numbers are already skewed towards Soraka wanting to go Spellthieves, etc. But I don't mind them skewing it even further because, again, players don't like incurring risk. Makes sense. Finally, Unsealed Spellbook is nerfed by 25% of its cooldown at all points in the game. Functionally, this means you're going to lose about 4 summoner spells over the course of a average game, which is pretty meaningful. Nexus Blitz comes out. I love Nexus Blitz. Super happy about it. Very excited. Cool beans. And that's it for the patch rundown. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.